Very, very nice to be here. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to be here. My name is Katja. I'm from the Interactive Media Lab Dresden, also with CETI. And today I would like to talk with you a little bit about a topic that we've already scratched on after the keynote, a little bit about avatars and about sharing spaces with different kinds of avatars. Because my research focus revolves around communication, collaboration, and mixed reality. And as a little disclaimer, I'm using the term mixed reality as kind of a catch-all, all-encompassing, including virtual reality. I know that is debatable if you should do that, but I'm doing it so we have the same vocabulary. So in mixed reality, if we're meeting in distributed spaces, if we're meeting somewhere where none of us is actually physically present, we often need to embody any kind of avatar representation so that we have some thing to be there for us. And there's such a huge and diverse spectrum of how these kinds of representations can look like. They can range from very abstract, maybe just like a position pointer for the head, to hyper realistic, and in between there are any kinds of stylized cartoonish representations that you can use. And also how you look like does not only depend on the design of the avatar, it also depends on what of your body can be tracked. So your fingers, your face, your eye gaze, anything. And then of course, if you throw additional modalities into the mix that allow you to transfer audio as well, or even allow you to transfer haptics or any kind of touch sensations, we have an even broader spectrum that opens up about how we can design or choose avatars. And the question is, now that we have so many choices of avatars, how do we choose the right avatar for our experience? Because they are important. The way they look is important to us because it can affect a lot of factors such as co and social presence, the relationship between the user and the avatar, and it can also affect our communication efficiency and also the quality of our communication. So how do we choose the right one? Short, you can't really choose the right one because the right one is very, very subjective, and it depends on not only the task and the goal of whatever environment you're meeting in, it also depends on the physical context. If we're doing it in AR, for example, it depends on the virtual environment, the social context, how the people are socially and interpersonally related to each other, and their experiences, their preferences, and also their anonymity demands. Because we are not only talking about spaces where everyone feels comfortable, we could also talk about spaces where I would like to be anonymous, maybe. All three of those avatars is me. All of them are embodied by me, but I think only one of them is kind of recognizable as me. But in other spaces, I might want to use, for example, the male one, because I might not want to be perceived as female or something like this. So it's very important to choose right. But these avatars, they do not only affect us in the sense that people perceive us. We're always talking about this side of the conversation, that someone is perceiving me. How are they feeling by perceiving me as an avatar? And we a lot of the time we leave out the other side of the conversation. How do I actually feel about embodying something that is not myself? And the knowledge that I'm currently being represented by an avatar that maybe looks nothing like me. What does that do with myself? And that is the question that leads me to the first research project I want to show to you today. I'm showing a total of 3. It gets more technical as we go. And this is the project that we call Mirror Me. And the motivation behind this project was basically COVID experiences and Zoom conferences and the whole concept of Zoom fatigue. It's probably, a lot of you probably heard about it, Zoom fatigue, the heightened exhaustion that you feel in Zoom meetings in comparison to in-person meetings. And there are a lot of factors contributing to this kind of fatigue, but one of those factors is speculated to also be the self-view and the fact that you can see yourself the entire time while you're also seeing the others and you're looking yourself in the face. Having a self-view can be very practical for us. It can make sense to want to see ourselves because we want to adjust our appearance maybe, or we want to monitor whether our nonverbal communication kind of translates to the other people. But it also tends to make us anxious and it makes us a little bit self-conscious. But still, even though these things happen, we choose, or most people choose, to keep their self-view enabled, even though they can turn it off. So we asked ourselves if this is something that can be replicated in VR, if seeing yourself as an avatar in VR can also be impactful and have an impact on our self-confidence. So we performed a little study where we had different kinds of self-views, because obviously in VR with the 3D space, you have more options to design self-views. We didn't want to get feedback only on a specific design, so we designed a couple of them and studied it in like a communication-based task, where you on one hand explain something verbally to someone, and then on the other hand you explain something with gestures to someone else. And I'm going to show you the self-views that we designed in a minute, and we compared that obviously against a baseline without any kind of self-views in VR. Here you can see hopefully the two perspectives of people looking at each other, and also they can see their conversation partner and themselves in the first kind of self-view that we have here. It's the remote perspective view. So you see yourself from the perspective of the other person, and this kind of VR mirror is stuck to the other person, so you also have the chance to look past it and look away. The second self-view is a personal mirror. It's like a smaller mirror that you can actually place in your physical space, and it stays attached to your torso rotation, so that you can basically not really escape it, and you see yourself all the time, and not from the perspective of the other person. And the third one is a miniature avatar. So basically a very small version of yourself, mimicking and replicating your every move that you can place wherever you want, and you can look at yourself or you look at someone else. What we wanted to know here in this project is, on one hand, do users actually want to have a self-view in VR? Is that something that they perceive to be useful? Do they want to have it? Then does it affect in any kind of way their self-perception and their mental load? And how distracting is it actually? Where is the attention allocated in the room? And we found out that it actually does not have any effects on self-perception, on mental load, and on presence, even though it's a very like a foreign object kind of sitting in your room. And that users actually want to have it, but they want to have it specifically to monitor their gestures, to monitor their tracking, the quality of the tracking devices that track their face and their hands. Because even though we've used flagship devices, we've used the, where is it, Meta Quest Pro, even though we use flagship devices, the tracking is not 100% reliable, and people fear that some of the things that they want to convey do not translate. And that kind of brings up the question that we in human-computer interaction, a lot of the time we tend to design for like a future where everything is possible and all the devices, everyone has access to everything. But usually that's not the case. Not everyone has an access to like a 2,000 euro flagship face tracking device. And we would like to design these spaces as inclusive as possible, right? So you could imagine that a lot of the people that might join into these spaces might not have any kind of tracking capabilities at all. So you would want them to also be able to emotionally express themselves, which brings me to the next project I would like to show you, which is exactly about this. So if we do not have the perfect tracking capabilities, how can we compensate for that? I showed you this clip before, but I didn't show you what happens after it. So right now I'm putting on my own headset so that I can see the other person as well, and suddenly my head disappears. So now the depth camera that has been capturing my entire body pretty well, I would say, before, struggles so much with discerning where my head ends. My hair is suddenly gone, my forehead is gone. And that is pretty nice visual representation about what happens to also external tracking when you put on a headset that doesn't have built-in tracking in there. So does it make sense to equip spaces where not everyone has a built-in tracking with external tracking when these kinds of issues occur, that you have half of your face covered and you kind of work only with the lower half of your face? Or do we maybe need to compensate differently for these kinds of spaces with our face tracking? And can we trigger facial expressions manually? And does that make more sense? This is what we study in this little project here. So we had this setup. Oh, I'm kind of in time. Yes. We have this setup where two people are sitting across from each other and they're divided by like a whiteboard in the middle. And they can see each other's avatars. And one person here on the left side is tracked, has like a camera position in front of them. And this camera has external face tracking, so basically just the lower half of the face. And the other person sees their avatar. They play a game, they play a game of who am I, and they can just answer with facial expressions. So the expressions are very much in focus. And yeah, we wanted to compare whether this like imperfect tracking that is prone to jitters and that is kind of lower quality than built-in tracking is better than no tracking at all, or if we rather just trigger facial expressions manually. So just like, once again, this is the setup. You can see the person that is, it looks like they are projected onto the wall, but it is, oops, okay. It doesn't transfer very well. I think you get the gist of it. So behind that is the real person that is being tracked. And here, once again, I have a lot of videos that I hope they get transferred right. We have the two conditions compared. So the external face tracking, here in the snippet, it works okay. But usually it had a lot of difficulties and a lot of jittering in there. And the lower one is the externally triggered, the manually triggered facial expressions. And we measured two different factors. We measured factors of social interaction and factors of usability. And for social interaction, we wondered whether this manually triggering facial expressions would affect social presence, of course, but also interpersonal trust and communication satisfaction. Because when we know that the facial expression that we see from the other person is not real, does that make us trust them less, maybe? Because we know they just pressed the button. And the answer is no. Apparently, the measures of social interaction were not affected at all in our study, but we had a very clear preference for the manually triggered facial expressions, which surprised me, because the people found it to be so much effort to perform a facial expression and worry about it working, and at the same time holding it for a couple of seconds to ensure that it is working. That is for the person that's performing the expression. And the other person found it like too much effort and like uncanny that the expressions were jittering a little bit. So both sides consistently said, you know what, if this is what we have, let's just rather trigger them manually. That makes a lot more sense for us. And the last thing I would like to show you is a little bit different, because we are talking about mixed presence, and mixed presence is kind of using this presence term in a different context. And I would like to tell you how we define mixed presence. We define it as the junction between co-located mixed reality interaction and remote mixed reality interaction. Co-located with two people, and here completely remote with having an avatar in your room. And in the middle of that is the mixture. So you share your space on one hand with virtual avatars, and then also with physical people. And that adds like an extra layer of complexity to it, because you now have the opportunity to directly compare these two people. You can touch this person, you cannot touch this person. You can see this person's facial expressions, you cannot see this person's facial expressions, and you know that this person looks like they look, and the other person maybe not. So this is like just a layer of complexity in there, but also an extra layer of complexity when it comes to the development of these kinds of systems, because they do combine the intricacies of co-located systems and the intricacies of remote systems. And just developing that is sometimes a little bit of a nightmare, because we started off this project with a specific research question in mind. It was whether we would treat each other differently in these spaces. So do I, for example, divert all of my attention to the physical person in the room? Or do I divert my attention to the cool, weird avatar in the room? Is that something like, how do I differently treat these kinds of people? And I never got to answer this question, because I first had to build the system, and that's it. And that took like a year. And it took a year. This is something you don't need to actually read what's on there. This is something that I prepared for my students, because I wanted them to understand the complexity of why it is so difficult to develop and design mixed presence systems. As you can see, this is just the visual layer of data that has to be transferred between every kind of actor here. So you got the coordinate system, you got the physical objects, the virtual objects, you got the poses, you got the physical space that might need to be transferred when you're in augmented reality, for example, and you can kind of get an idea of how complex these spaces get. So after developing the system for a year, we thought to ourselves, hey, we cannot be the first to struggle with that, and we will not be the last to struggle with that. So why not make this kind of a toolbox framework for people to start off on if they actually have a research question related to mixed presence, and then they can maybe use this system and jump over the entire effort of developing everything. So we built a toolbox framework where you can enable co-located collaborators, you can enable virtual collaborators with spatial audio, interactable objects, virtual annotations, and I can show you a video of it in a second. Yeah, as a way to kind of take away this hindrance of the initial technological setup that often prevents researchers from asking questions at all because it's just too much effort. And we wanted to help them make some design choices for their platforms even before they build their platforms. So I can show you a little, okay, disclaimer. This avatar is very jittery because we chose to capture our bodies only from one perspective with one depth camera because we just didn't have so many depth cameras. But the way our system is built, it is supposed to be extensible with multiple cameras. You can capture yourself from multiple perspectives, and then you might not be so jittery anymore. But you see what I mean. This is both of my colleagues that built the system together with me, and the first use case that we implemented in the system, which included, for example, you can imagine some kind of collaborative design session where you would need to annotate and author kind of virtual objects in space. So we have some shared virtual annotations that can be created both by the co-located participant, but also by the virtual participants. Obviously, we also hear each other. We can not only see each other. This is the second use case that we have, which is like an interior design use case, which is just supposed to showcase that we have interactable objects. We just kind of slap a script onto, and then they can be grabbed by everyone in the virtual environment. And this is a furniture placement scene. We're placing it in the room. Yes. It's kind of visible. Yeah. And now we also have some example avatars that you can choose from. But as I said, it's built to be extensible, so you can upload the avatars that you want. We have like the pink lady, the man, and then we have the point cloud avatar that you've seen before in the little GIF that I showed you before to have like a more realistic representation of you. It's, as I said, just captured from one perspective, so it's not entirely complete. And then we have another thing that is now, because the system has been built 2 years ago, it's often completely built into like the meta building blocks, the calibration and the QR code tracking, but we also added a little feature of being able to very precisely adjust the scene. So you can grab basically the point in the scene, adjust it, and overlay the points to the actual edge of the table to be able to have very precise results of a matching scene. And the last thing right here, something that we thought of when we transferred these enormous point clouds that took a while, and it introduced a lot of latency to the system. And we talked about it, whether like, does it even make sense to have such a system or to talk to each other when there's like a couple of seconds in between question and answer in between the people. We managed to get like a kind of low latency for our system, but other people might have a different network infrastructure. So they might want to test it out beforehand and artificially hire the latency in their system to check, can we still have a conversation even in the network structure that is here in our university or not? So this is like another little thing. You can find the system on GitHub and try it out if you have a couple of depth cameras and a couple of HoloLenses and a couple of PCs. Yeah, and I think that's actually it. That was a little bit of an overview of the research that I've done. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, so I'm going to come and ignore you later, but are there questions in the room? Yeah, Elena, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. It was very interesting work. Oh, yes, my name is Irene Valori. I'm also working here at Dresden with Merck Costa. And I wanted to ask you about the manual triggers for emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Like how many emotions do you consider? How does that work?
We have 4 predetermined emotions. So we wanted, since we're playing this game where you're supposed to answer with facial expressions, we wanted to have some negative and some positive ones. We have happy, sad, surprised, and disgusted, which kind of can be triggered manually. And then we also, in our tracking condition, we kind of recognize the beginnings of these emotions and amp them up a little bit. So if someone, for example, me, my avatar, when I track my face, they looked sad all the time because my mouth is naturally downturned a little bit when I'm just resting. So when I'm starting to move my corners of my mouth upwards a tiny bit, we need to turn it up more to actually make the avatar smile. So we also focused on recognizing these 4 emotions and then just kind of pulling them up a bit more.
Is there another question in the room? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. With respect to the mirror, I really enjoyed the mirror, these kind of mirrors, but one mirror you did not use and one mirror is something you didn't want. We are studying a mirror that captures both. Like imagine a mirror in the room would actually show us both of us, maybe my partner from the back and then from the side, and that would not be like the Zoom, but would be more VR-like. So wondering if you thought about it or why, or if it's not done why.
We considered like a couple of different mirrors and we tried a couple of different things out. And because we wanted to have to create the equivalent of a self view in Zoom and reduce like additional distractions, that's why we also had a very neutral background. We tried not to put any like plants or images or anything in the background. Because we wanted to really let the people focus on themselves and what it does to see yourself in these spaces. So we did not actually consider showing the other person from the back as well, but it could be interesting, definitely.
Just to add on top of it, I mean, one direction one can look at. Obviously, we had some experiences in a dance class. You know, you have a mirror, you look at a lot of things.
Yeah.
You have a relationship between the people, not just yourself or the other each other dancing, but also how synchronize and so forth. Saying, I imagine I've not seen studies of that kind exactly. You need something to be different, but I imagine that when you are looking at a mirror that includes both, there's actually a lot of social cues that come from the that's
also just, I would say, a limitation of the work because we just have a one-on-one scenario, and we have a seated scenario as well. So if you imagine this kind of scenario in like where you're standing and moving around or anything, then this kind of mirror wouldn't make so much sense if it's stationary because I can just like turn away from it. I don't see myself anymore. So I would say in a scenario where you would actually also maybe watch other people's interpersonal interaction and have like mirrors placed somewhere where you can see them interacting would be very, very fascinating and could be like the next step to something like this.
I just want to mention that that's what we have in the top left-hand corner. That's what the owl does, right? It also situates you in the room, which I think is really relevant. Olaf has a question back.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. I also like the self-avatar. Very interesting for VR applications, but have you thought about what you can study in VR that helps sort of these people who like suffer in the Zoom meetings of seeing their self-avatars? Any thoughts on this?
Oh, you mean to adapt this experience?
Anxiousness.
Yeah.
And,
because we didn't actually measure any kind of these negative impacts in our VR experience, we didn't think further about how to adapt it. But I feel like it would make, because we allowed the people beforehand to customize or like personalize their avatar. And I think this step of being able to choose beforehand how you would look like, we asked them not to make a perfect replica of themselves, but just to like create something that you feel represented by and that you're comfortable with. A lot of people just did themselves in a way. So this is my avatar somehow. And a lot of people, some people just kind of add a different hairstyle and they added like a hat or like some jewelry that they didn't have before. And I feel like I didn't actually look at the data. This will be interesting because we also assessed self-confidence beforehand. So if those might be like, I'm just speculating right now, maybe those are the people that usually feel a little less self-confident with how they look like. They would like to adapt themselves and make themselves a bit different. That's actually very interesting. I need to look that up. But yeah, adapting the avatar to make you confident. You could also, of course, say if this doesn't help you and if this makes you anxious, you could also take it away. not have any kind of image of yourself if it doesn't help you. Or, for example, like this one where you can choose to look away compared to this one that just follows you about, and that would make you probably a bit more anxious than the other one where you just can look somewhere else. So different possibilities.
It would also be nice to pick one or two of those conditions and then also do sort of a Zoom session and have them self-rate.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be very interesting.
With Yasmin, we have some data on hidden self. We did a Zoom-based mirror game where people like to play with each other, and they either had access to their self or not. And I'm trying to, in one case, with it, it helped. Not sure which direction. I think they coordinated better when they had the selfie because it gave you extra information about your own movements, especially with the lag. But all the subjective ratings were better. Agency, cohesion was better without it. So it gets in the way of how you actually feel, you know, sort of the feelings of it, but actually synchrony is better. So it's complex. It's very complex. We have time for one last question.
Is it about this last thing? Is it something close to the image we have about ourselves in the mirror? Is it the idea of the self exactly? Because it's also complicated when it's on the mirror, because we always pose when we're looking to the mirror, and it's not ourselves. I don't know how I look when I'm terribly jealous or very unhappy or whatever. So is it different in this virtual reality world? I don't know how to ask questions to scientists, I'm sorry. Because I'm a theater scholar from Turkey. Is it completely different from this idea of this thing in the mirror is me, but not me exactly? Is it here, is it comparable with this mirror idea of self?
I don't think I can answer that. I feel like, because I'm not a psychologist, I have a little computer scientist.
I don't know. I don't think we know, right? I think that's the whole point. Is you asked the question about whether the movie is the same as the VR. I think these representations of ourselves, like if you're at the movie theater, sometimes definitely guys imagine they're actually saber. Like they're in there. Females maybe slightly less. They're sort of like watching it from a distance, but they're in the movie sort of. So I think, I don't know, this mirror representation is a very interesting one. I do think the fact that you have choice is very interesting. Like you can decide to get back to your sort of avatars. Like the fact that you can choose how you represent it and how much of you represent. I think part of the emotion data, what I think is interesting is you have a lot more choice.
Yes.
It's not like something's tracking you and all of a sudden your smile is different. You know, we don't know when we smile.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to say I want to smile. So I think there's a big difference depending on how much control you have over it. I think it's very different.
And it's also very much dependent on the person as well. Like they have so many people that were like, oh, that was so fun. I liked that, and I also liked to choose my avatar. I like to press the buttons, and other people were like, I don't know, why do I have to also make this and this and this choice? Like this kind of choice fatigue that some people plays into. So yeah,
complex.
Yes.